Hello, good morning. My name is Francesca Gold, and I'm so sorry I cannot be there with you live, but I'm happy to be making this recording right now to share my research with you. I am a graduate student at Loyola Marymount University, writing my thesis right now, and thank you so much to Dr. Chappell for inviting me to present, and Dr. Miller for encouraging me to do this research. As you might be able to tell, I'm sick. I'm not really feeling well and completely lost my voice a few days ago. So I have a throat lozenge and some tea here. And we'll just see how my voice holds up for this presentation, but please bear with me, and thank you so much again for being here and being interested in my research. One of the reasons I'm not able to be present this weekend is I'm actually facilitating a 3-day retreat at the Krishnamurti Foundation, and Krishnamurti's work has had a deep influence on me, and it's allowed me to really think about things and ponder subjects deeply, complex subjects at that, while genuinely just asking questions, solving, just getting to the nature of things, the root of things. And so I would definitely attribute that to why I'm researching what I'm researching. So this project really started in the fall of 2021 in Dr. Christopher Miller's History of Modern Yoga class. We were instructed to conduct ethnographic research for our final project, and I chose to focus on a community that I've been a part of for many years. So one of the primary objectives of this History of Modern Yoga course was to answer how forms of contemporary yoga practiced today are connected to pre-modern forms of yoga developed in India. And so, seeing as I was already a certified yoga therapist, C-IAYT, through the International Association of Yoga Therapists, did a whole, 1,000+ hour program through LMU. I actually was almost grandfathered into the certification, but I'm so glad that I did the training. This is an area of interest to me, right? So that was kind of the starting point, and I knew I wanted to research yoga therapy. I was first introduced to this Pañcamayakośa model in 2010, so about 12 years ago, through the Himalayan Institute. So I decided to dig a little bit deeper into what we call yoga therapy. Sometimes I refer to it as modern yoga therapy. It's interchangeable. And I wanted to know more about the history of it specifically, seeing as this was a history of modern yoga class, right? So I wanted to understand the recent success of it in healthcare in the past decade and decades. And personally, I'm someone who has utilized yoga, meditation, self-inquiry, all of this, lifestyle changes for many, many, many years, all of my adult life and through my adolescence as well, to overcome tremendous personal challenges. So this research is close to my heart. It's not, this intellectual just kind of game for me. So yoga therapy, if you're not familiar, I'm going to just read the definition from IAYT. So it's the professional application of the principles and practices of yoga to promote health and well-being within a therapeutic relationship. It includes personalized assessment, goal setting, lifestyle management, and yoga practices for small groups or for individuals. So the part of this definition that I wanted to investigate was the personalized assessment aspect. So pretty much every yoga therapist I know, and I don't know them all, of course, but the ones I know use the Pañcamaya model as in their assessments and as part of their assessments. I had been told by my yoga therapy teachers that this model came from the Taittiriya Upanishads, but when I read the text, translated, of course, even though we do study Sanskrit in the graduate course, when I read the text, the word kosha wasn't actually in the Upanishads, and that was in my yoga philosophy class maybe 2 years ago. And so, like I mentioned, my upbringing was built on just this curiosity and wondering. I was just curious um, about it, wanting to connect the dots. So I decided to do my project on this and dig a little bit deeper. So I knew I wanted to get other people's insights and not just do my own research, but I really wanted other people who were using this model as well, as my peers. So, pardon me, I got Institutional Review Board, IRB approval through LMU. And this ensures the safety and protection of human and animal subjects involved in any research that we do. It's actually a really long process and includes training on proper research techniques. It's a long application, and you need to get approval from your department chair as well as the IRB committee. So I received approval to do this research. So my research question examines the historical origins of the Pañcamaya model. It's widely used within the yoga therapy sphere. And I had the original question of who developed this model as a modern or just as a yoga therapy assessment tool or just assessment, and how did it become this kind of touchstone for yoga therapy, right? Another question, why have certain practices, philosophies, even personalities stayed at the forefront of our minds as we're modern day practitioners? And so a little bit of an overview of the model itself. You can just simply look up, what are the 5 koshas. You can go ahead and do that right now if you want while you're listening. I'm not going to go into that. But we do see seeds of reference to this in the Upanishadic literature. And we know that the Upanishads are a guiding philosophy for life. They're based in Sankhya and Vedantic ideals. We know that Upanishad is something like to sit next to, to sit near to. So it's really beautiful in that way, I think. So personally, this makes me just think of 2 friends, if you will, sitting together discussing, how to deal with suffering, just as one specific example. So let's see. History of this model. So getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty here, and this is all just going to be a snapshot of my research. But beyond what's listed of the koshas in James Mallinson's and Mark Singleton's Roots of Yoga book in the 8th or 9th century Advaita Vedantic text, written in the form of a poem, the Viveka Chudamani, which is attributed to be authored by Shankaracharya. In verse 164, it explains how identification with the body is a source of misery, and the reader is advised to destroy it with utmost care and to avoid rebirth. So it's mentioned here. In the next verse, that was 164, now in 165, it talks about prana. We know prana is energy, basically. When coupled with the 5 organs of action, it forms the vital sheath, the Pañcamayakośa, or the prana kosha. This sheath is permeated by the Annamaya, the material sheath, and it's explained how this phenomenon gives appearance to the body being alive, and it's really just prana animating it through speech, which is obviously a challenge for me right now. Manual activity, locomotion, moving, excretion, and reproduction. The next 45 verses, so 166 and 45 verses after that, go into more detail regarding these 5 sheaths. And finally, verse 210 explains how once the sheaths are eliminated, as I mentioned earlier, how Atman, or the true self, is revealed. So the takeaway from this, for simplicity's sake, is that the goal from the perspective of this text is to eliminate identification with each sheath one by one in a methodical way, and to reveal our true selves. Pardon me. So that's the first time kosha is mentioned, and Kosha's mentioned more in more places as well. It's in my research. I'm not going to go into the specifics of that right now. So I also talk a little bit about the history of yoga therapy. And just to really briefly summarize it, I talk about Yogendra and Kuvayananda. I also talk about the German nature cure. Gandhi was a big fan of this. And Yogendra in particular, Sri Yogendra and Kuvayananda, they don't get talked a lot about in the history of yoga therapy at all. In fact, they were not mentioned at all in my 1,000-hour training, and I just want to give proper notice to them. And I make connections to what their work did and what their research did, their experiences, how it supports modern yoga therapy. So what did my research find? So at the time, last semester, I interviewed 12 certified yoga therapists like myself. Since then, I've interviewed a few more, and that'll be in my final thesis, what some others have said. I've purposely have tried to go out to get a lot of different viewpoints, because what happened last semester was actually 100% of the people I interviewed used this model. 50% of them had been yoga therapists for less than 5 years. We know it's a new profession, right? Less than 10% of them had been practicing for more than 16 years. Over 45% of them more than 4 years. Most of them are in practice as a yoga therapist, meaning that they actually do this for a living. And 100% of them, again, use this model in their intakes. I'd say most of them, I think it was almost all but two of them, the people that I researched, had some knowledge of where this model came from. The others did not. Okay, so some final points here. I have a couple points to make. I do think that this research is important to do and to kind of close the gaps a little bit, kind of bridge the conversation that I think that we need to be having in our field right now. So from a big picture perspective, this is the next logical step for this integrated, somewhat globally inspired holistic medicine that we're practicing. So, and also for reference, I mentioned it's a newer field in the way that it's being practiced now. Psychotherapy and physical therapy are about 100 years old, give or take. And modern yoga therapy, and you can check the C-IAYT website, is about 30 years old. So this emerging modern yoga therapy profession, it's here to stay. That's my personal opinion. I think it's needed, and I'm going to share a little bit about how I'm integrating it into my community after I present here. I suspect that just like in modern yoga in general, this identity crisis, there's a complex history, these ongoing conversations that we definitely need to have about appropriation, correct applications. These conversations should continue, and I think with that also accurate historical information as well. I'd also like to note that there are no specific yoga therapy tools that are standardized. It is my hope in just starting to do this research and reporting on this research that this field is ushered forward in meaningful ways. There is a note, a voice, I think, that should be offered here of not wanting to standardize intakes, because then it's not personalized. So that's also the other side of the argument here. And really, I see my role right now as sort of just presenting both sides and trying to explain it to the best of my ability. I'll also note that when people study these tools in psychotherapy or in physical therapy, you study the background and the theory of these and the people who founded these assessments, and we know the history of it a lot more. We know how far back these tools go. Is it 2,500 years? Like a lot of people say that this model is, or is it not? And my research definitely goes into that and examines that narrative. There are some cases that unless you have a license for an assessment, you cannot even use that assessment. So some examples, the MMPI, you can Google all this, SA, SSI, BDI, BA. There's a lot of assessment tools used in other in licensed professions, that they're regulated. And again, I'm presenting this information. I think it's interesting to present it all, and hopes of opening conversation about it. Little bit more about my research in particular. So the absence of the word koshas, is it a case of semantics? That's one argument I got. And okay, what if it's not just semantics, I ask as well. What if this, what if, this is a question for us all to hold, what if this desire for antiquity, and therefore if something's ancient, there's a greater authenticity to it, what if it's pushed the date of this model back 2,500 years ago when really koshas only mentioned 400 years ago? And I go into detail in this. Which one sounds more impressive? I'm using this model from 2,500 years ago, or I'm using this model from 400. 400 is still a long time, right? And why? Why do we need it to be older? That's a question I have. Also, I just want to mention Pañcamayakośa, or Pañcamaya, or Pañcakosha, however you say it. It just sounds so beautiful. It's a beautiful, Sanskrit, Hindi, they're both beautiful languages. Main Hindi Sikh rahi hu. I'm learning to speak Hindi. It's so beautiful to hear, to listen to speak, to learn. I think saying, this is the model I use, I think it's really, it just rolls off the tongue. It's very sexy in a sense, right? So that's a note that came up for me. And a genuine question I have is antiquity and familiarity with something that is ancient, is that what marks a good yoga therapist? And as Amanda Lucia asks in one of her recent books that's come out, wouldn't just being a good yoga therapist make you a good yoga therapist? We don't need this tie to antiquity, or do we? Do you? As expressed in my research findings, many of the participants use this model because it's what they were taught to do. Some expressed that they did have a desire to learn the roots of the model, but only 2 mentioned that they knew where it could be found. Nobody named any other source text other than the Taittiriya Upanishad. Applications of such information to the profession of yoga therapy reveals, in my opinion, perhaps yours too, just a weakness in the greater yoga therapy community. And a weakness doesn't have to be a bad thing. There's plenty of times when someone's pointed out a weakness to me and it's become my greatest strength. So there's a gap in perhaps there's a gap in just motives of yoga therapists wanting to understand the depth from which their training has come from, and then taking action steps to doing so. So what I mean to say is, in my research, a lot of yoga therapists said they honored the tradition, appropriation, not appropriating was very important to them, but there was this gap in then taking action. And I'm wondering, is the gap because we don't know how to access source texts? Is it lack of time? Is it lack of confidence? What is the reason? I think it's also important to note, take the therapist part of yoga therapist quite seriously. Um, is this a body denying model? I opened with explaining how the idea was to, I don't know if obliterate is too strong of a word, but move through each of the koshas and unidentify with them. And this is the practice of neti neti, not this, not that, right? So this body denying model. And how does this fit into modern yoga therapy? And we're familiar a little bit, hopefully at this point, all with spiritual bypassing and the danger in that, especially when we're dealing with trauma. So let's see, I know I'm getting to time here. I want to mention too, really important, one participant shared about a physician that she knows who learned about this model from her. And that physician felt that all healthcare providers ought to utilize this perspective to shift client communications and consider clients in a broader approach. So that means that there's something to this approach. I like this approach. In my research, I go into some case studies and a little bit more of just my engagement with the kosha model. There does seem to be a disconnect between the vision of yoga therapy and the ability to integrate and accurately integrate, this textually relevant information into trainings, into scholarly articles, into client education. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. If you're watching this, please reach out. I'm hopeful that this is not the case and will not always be the case. Like I said, I'm a yoga therapist in practice. I just opened up a yoga studio in Ojai, California, Southern California. And that leads into my next portion. So I just opened up a studio. It's called Breathe Ojai, and it is a sliding scale. So pay what you can. There's no gatekeeping. Trauma informed. All of our teachers have trauma training. Accessible. So I know there's another presenter here talking a little bit about accessible yoga and working with disability. So yes, all of the above. And of course, then I bring in my yoga therapy aspect to it. And Breathe also takes on the form of a community hall. So we have 12-step meetings there. We have support groups of many different kinds. I call it, it's yoga for people who aren't yoga people. I mentioned we are in a self-inquiry and yoga retreat right now, diving into the questions of what is yoga, what is Sankhya philosophy, how does that intersect with what Krishnamurti teaches, which is very Advaitic, Vedantic kind of work. We were just talking about that earlier today, duality and non-duality. We have an anxiety and panic disorder support group. I do work with a licensed psychotherapist on that. We have community yoga therapy clinics. So people can sign up at an extremely reduced cost of what I normally charge for my one-on-one sessions and leave with actual practical tools to make lifestyle changes. Of course, community satsangs and kirtans. We have a book club right now. We are reading Jivana Haman's Yoga Revolution book. And we are just excited, really excited for his new book. We have yoga for people in recovery. I'm a member of the recovery community almost 7 years. Knock on wood. Oh, that was my little dog over there. So we offer that. And we also I'm offering self-regulation tools for codependency and relational trauma. And this was something else that came out of my graduate work with Dr. Fazio. And of course, some teacher trainings, and many years down the road, I'm hopeful, yoga therapy trainings as well. So I know I'm a little bit over time here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that my voice came through clearly, and please reach out. You can email me. You can go to breatheojai.com, look us up online. If you're ever in Ojai, come and visit us. And I just hope that this research and the work that we're all doing here um, leads us all to a place of deep sacredness and just shared unity in this vision of bringing these teachings in all their forms and whatever we call them to life in a living, breathing way. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your conference. Bye.